Author that we're going to be examining is the Netziv of Volozhin, and the book that we're going to be studying a passage from is his commentary on the Chumash, known as the Hamek Dovid, which translates as the depth of the matter. First, as always in this series, a few biographical notes about the author that we're studying tonight. The Netziv is an acronym. Netziv stands for Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. That was the man's name. But the double entendre is, let me show you, in the Chumash. We always try to be as text-based as possible. You have to understand when you're studying great rabbinic literary giants, you have to understand their literary and biblical allusions, the turns of phrase that they choose. Just give me a moment here. Take a look on page 87. Okay? 87. Saul is here tonight. Okay, he can corroborate my Hebrew as usual. When I need a Hebrew corroboration, I need Saul here. Page 87, verse 27. Verse 26. Lot's wife looked behind him, and she was turned into a pillar of salt. Saul, b'vakasha. Tikra, verse 26 on the Hebrew facing side of the page. Vatabet ishto.
Okay, in Hebrew.
Yes, please.
Vatabet ishto me'acharav v'tehi netziv melach.
Read the second to the last word aloud.
Netziv melach.
Netziv. Netziv translates in English as a pillar. So the acronym of the man's name was Netziv, but the double entendre, if you don't read it as an acronym, if you read it as a word, it means he was a pillar. The pillar of Volozhin. So called because he was the most illustrious yeshiva of the mother of all yeshivas. Volozhin, we've studied in earlier People of the Book series, we've studied passages of Nefesh HaChaim, of the great Rav Chaim Volozhiner, who was the founding Rosh Yeshiva, the founding dean of the yeshiva. And this yeshiva in Volozhin, Lithuania, was basically the model for all subsequent yeshivas. All right? I just wanted to understand the Netziv's historical significance. I want to tell you a little anecdote of too much later, 19th century. What are we doing in the 9th century? Later 19th century, early, overlapping into the 20th century, actually. Gedolei Yisrael. The Alter of Slobodka, Rav Naftali Tzvi Finkel, Nosson Tzvi Finkel, not to be confused with a great nephew of his by the same name, who's currently the dean of the Mir Yeshiva in Yerushalayim. He's one of the Alter of Slobodka. Slobodka, in the pre-war era, was the Rosh Yeshiva factory. Okay? He was considered the great pedagogue and the great shaper of young men, preeminent shaper of young men of his generation. Okay, among other luminaries that were his students, I digress a minute here, but just to understand the historical significance of the Netziv and the uniqueness of the Netziv, among his students were basically the people who, both in the land of Israel and in America, in the US of A, resurrected Orthodox Judaism, Torah Judaism, after the Holocaust. Okay, some of his students who came to America were Aaron Kotler, the Rosh Yeshiva of the Lakewood Yeshiva. Rav Dovid Leibowitz, Rav Heinrich Leibowitz's father, the founding Rosh Yeshiva of Chofetz Chaim Yeshiva. Rav Yankov Kamenetsky, arguably the most influential Rosh Yeshiva of Tar Vadas. Rav Yitzchak Hutner, the Rosh Yeshiva of Chaim Berlin. Rav Yitzchak Ruderman, Yaakov Yitzchak Levi Ruderman, Rosh Yeshiva of Ner Yisrael in Baltimore. Basically, the American yeshiva world, as we know it, was shaped to a great extent by his students. And in Israel as well, Rav Moshe Chavroni, Rav Chatzel Sarna, the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron, just to name a few. So the Chofetz Chaim is reputed to have expressed to this Alter Slobodka at one time. He said, Rab not der Hirsch, ich bin euch mekane. Weil ich bin ein Mechaber von Svarim. Und ihr seid ein Mechaber von Menschen. He says, I'm envious of you, Rab not der Hirsch. Why? Because I'm an author of books, but you are an author of people. Okay? The Netziv of Volozhin was an author of both. Okay? In other words, had he never put pen to paper in his life, he would still be a major Jewish historical figure of the 19th century. The Volozhin yeshiva at the time produced such enormous Torah luminaries, just to mention a few, as Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, okay, the Slutzker Rav, and the author of Even Ezel, a monumental work on Maimonides, the Dvar Avram, the last Kovner Rav, who died in the Kovner Ghetto during World War II, Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKayin Cook, the first chief Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel, and basically the ideological father of religious Zionism. Rav Moshe Mordechai Epstein, the Rosh Yeshiva of the Slobodka Yeshiva that I just mentioned a moment before. He was partners with the Alter of Slobodka. Reb Zelig Reuven Bengus, chief rabbi of Jerusalem and author of the famous Responsa book, Leflages Reuven. Okay? Parenthetically, I want to say that it's a dubious distinction, but I don't want to... I don't have to volunteer this information, but I'm going to anyway. I'm feeling a little naughty tonight, right? It's the day where somebody in a red suit wants to know who's been naughty and who's been nice. Okay, so at any rate, it can be argued that the Volozhin Yeshiva, under the Netziv stewardship, put out at least as many world-class apikarsim, or heretics, or freethinkers, as world-class Rosh Yeshivas. But it's true. You know, among other people, the Nobel, I think he was a Nobel Prize-winning poet, Hebrew poet, Chaim Nachum Bialik, was there in his times. Many of the leaders of Bundism, revisionist Zionism, and many other isms that was the political ferment that I spoke about in the blurb on this series came out of the Volozhin Yeshiva. It was a place for great Jewish intellectuals, both of the Torah stripe and sadly, unfortunately, of the non-Torah stripe, to develop and to grow. So again, had he never written anything, he would have been a historically significant person. He was a mechaber von Menschen. He was an author of people, but he was also a great author of books. Okay. Besides the book that we're studying tonight, he was also the author of Hamek Shaila. Hamek Shaila is a very significant and important responsa book. For those of you who are not familiar with what I mean when I say responsa or responsum, okay, the halachic process is not static. The halachic process unfolds and continues to expand to this very day. Okay, we know today as Torah observant Jews that you don't get into a car and drive a car on Shabbos. Okay, but before there were internal combustion engines, this wasn't a relevant question on Shabbos. There had to be some rabbi, some halachic authority when internal combustion engines first came out to rule. Is this permissible on Shabbos? Is this not permissible on Shabbos? Okay? Just 1 second. Okay? In more recent times, there's been tremendous breakthroughs and strides in medical technology. I mean, just in some of the more, marquee Klieg lights, responsum, I should say, that have had to be written over the last several decades. Okay? Artificial insemination, good according to the Torah or not? In vitro fertilization, is there a halachically acceptable way to do this or not? What's the engineering way to construct a proper Torah Shabbos observant, I should say, Shabbos elevator? Is there a way to do such a thing? Hydroponic plants, what bracha do you make on them? All right? As technology advances, halacha has got to keep pace. And even if it's not, we're not talking about technological breakthroughs, there are very many gray areas in the halakhic literature that until a precedent-setting case comes to demand some kind of practical resolution, it hadn't really been discussed in the halakhic literature. And therefore, throughout every generation, there are great halakhic decisors who have got to write the landmark. Consider them, if the document we'd be dealing with would be the U.S. Constitution instead of the Torah, consider them precedent-setting Supreme Court decisions. All right, that decide, okay, this is what is allowable or not allowable under our Constitution. Okay, I'm just giving that as a model. So that was one great work that he wrote. Elise, still have a question?
No, that's okay. I was just thinking though, but with cars, automobiles coming in, they couldn't ride horse and buggies, carts on Shabbos, right?
No, they could not.
So it would be just follow logic.
I'll tell you after the class why it's not analogous.
Oh, okay.
Okay. It's not a good analogy.
Oh, okay.
Okay. He also wrote, excuse me, that was the Meshav Dovid. The Haimik Shaila, I meant to say, was on the Shiltas to Rabbi Chagan. It was a commentary on a responsa work of the Gaonic period. The Gaonic period was the period of rabbinic scholarship between the closing of the Talmud and the opening of the Rishonim period. They were known as Gaonim. We would loosely translate as geniuses, but that doesn't really describe them where they were historically. Okay. Then you have the Hamek Dover, the work that we're going to be studying tonight, which is actually two works. The Hamek Dover is a verse-by-verse commentary on the Torah, and then he's got something called the Harchev Dover, when he's got to expand on an idea at great length. He's got like a second commentary, a longer commentary that appears on selected verses. The Meromei Sada, which means the heights of the field, and that's his commentary on the Talmud. One of the unique things, biographically speaking, about the Netziv, who, by the way, was born in 1817 and died in 1893. One of the unique things about the Netziv, and somehow or another, this little factoid about the Netziv has made its way to us through the mirage-making hagiographic writers of most Jewish saints. Okay, for those not familiar with it, hagiography means a biography of a saint. Okay, and whether it's Catholic or Lahavlo Havdalis, whether it's Art Scroll, you very seldom get about great rabbinic figures a warts and all tell-all biography. But the basic model for these biographies, or I should call them hagiographies, go, absolute prodigy. From the age of 3, we know that the person was not only a genius, but a spiritually unique individual, and absolutely, saintly, and they never made a misstep in their life, and so on and so forth. Okay? Now, whether you find a narrative like that inspiring or depressing probably depends on your own turn of mind. But I'm not going to argue with the historical accuracy of those kind of biographies. Suffice it to say, that's not the biography, oral or written, that comes down to us about the Netziv of Volozhin. As a matter of fact, his reputation as a young boy was to have been a very mediocre and a very poorly behaved student. And I'm only telling you this not so much, again, if I go too much into his biography, we're not going to have a chance to examine the text tonight. But I'm just bringing this to you because it's very significant to his literary output. The story goes that when he was about 11 or 12 years old, okay, he was doing very poorly at Cheder, and he was a wild student to boot. His father, he was getting sent home from Cheder every day. Didn't have the structure we have today of going to the principal's office and detention, but something along those lines. And finally, his father threatened him, and he said, "Look, I'm giving you another year at school." And parenthetically, okay, 12 years of Torah education was not the norm in the 19th century. The average Jewish kid had 6 to 8 years of primary education. It was very concentrated. Most kids who went through that school system remarkably came out knowing the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, almost verbatim by heart with all the Rashis, and about anywhere from 80 to 200 pages of Talmud pretty much committed to memory. It was a very fine education and concentrated, considering the amount of the years of schooling and the age of the children. However, the idea of studying till the age of 18, 20, 25, 30, this is only for the intellectual creme de la creme. I'd say probably less than 5% of the students had that many years of education. So, what happened to the average kid? The average kid went out and worked. Whatever the anti-Semitic authorities, the times and climes allowed, that's how they sought their living. Okay? So the story goes that the Netziv of Volozhin's father, who was not a rabbi, threatened him. He said, "Naftali Hesh, listen to me." He says, "Either you buckle down in Cheder, either you're going to start learning like a mensch, or else I'm going to apprentice you to a shoemaker. Sign a schuster. You'll be a shoemaker." Okay? Nothing disreputable or disrespectable about. We learned last week, right? You should earn your own keep. Nothing wrong with that. Power and derech eretz. So the Netziv commented in his 70s. He was giving a Mussar Shmuz. He was giving a pep talk to some students. He says, you see how remarkable the ways of providence and free will are. He says, sometimes the most important decisions of our lives are entrusted to us when we're 10, 11, 12, okay, we have Arrested Development, let's say in our own frame of reference, 18 to 20 years old, right? Think of marriages, first marriages at any rate. A lot of times people are making these decisions when they don't have the life experience and the appreciation of how weighty the matter is. He says, try to imagine, I'm almost on that death's door, the Netziv said. I'm going to have to meet my maker in a short, 5 to 10 years, in all likelihood. He says, imagine if I had made the wrong decision. Imagine if I had goofed off in Cheder that year instead of really buckling down and listening to my father's threat. I would have become a shoemaker. So what would have happened? In my posthumous trial, we all go on trial before God, the heavenly tribunal, and we have to give an accounting of our lives. And I'd come in, and the scales of justice would be there, and I'd throw 5,000 pairs of handmade shoes on the scales, on the scale of goodness, and I'd say to God, I'd say to the tribunal there, I said, I did these faithfully, I put out a quality product, I never cheated my customers, I used the finest materials that were available to me. Send me into Gan Eden, send me into the Garden of Eden. And then the prosecuting angel would come out, and first he'd throw 5 books, the Hamek Dover, on the scale. It's beginning to tip a little bit. Then he'd throw the Meshiv Dover, my responsa book. It's beginning to tip a little bit, on the other side. Then he'd do the Hamek Shalom, my commentary on the Shiltes. And without even putting my last book, the Merem Yesada, on the scales, that's it. I'm going to hell in a handbasket. And they would say to me, not the Naftali Hersh. It says, Avu is the Hamek Dover. Avu is the Hamek Shalom. Where are the books he was supposed to produce? Where are the books he was supposed to put out? I happen to know a contemporary Talmud Chacham who's a published author in heavy duty Talmudic commentary, and he once I don't know if he was being envious or he's just being arch, but he said about another certain contemporary author. He says, something, I pity that guy because when he gets up to heaven, they're going to throw 500 pairs of shoes on the scale and say, where are the shoes he was supposed to produce? At any rate, this is a story that they tell about the Netziv, and I think it's very telling because, like I said before, even though he was both an author of men and an author of books, the way the story, the oral history has come down to us, he says, they weren't going to ask him, where's your Volozhin yeshiva? Where's the Dvar of Ram who was your student? Where's Reb Zelig Reuven Bengus or Rav Kook? That he wasn't worried about. But my books, that's my legacy that I bequeath to the Jewish people. That's my real, undying, infinite impact. So I'm just trying to point out that he was a Talmudic, rabbinical man of letters who cherished and I think really understood the historical significance of his own work. One last factoid, and I just think this is something very interesting and very cute. Speaking about educational institutions, the Netziv had 2 sons whose fame probably exceeded his own, at least the youngest son's fame exceeded his own. There are 2 famous educational institutions named after 2 of the Netziv sons. Okay? Would anyone like to take a stab at what they are? I'll give you one hint. One's in Brooklyn, and one's in Ramat Gan, near Tel Aviv. You want to take a stab? 2 great educational institutions named after sons of the Netziv. No? Okay. My own humble alma mater, the Sifter Rabbi Chaim Berlin. Rabbi Chaim Berlin was the last chief rabbi of Moscow before the communist takeover. He was the son of the Netziv. And a much younger son of the Netziv, Hebraized the name when he moved to Israel, changed it from Berlin to Bar Ilan. Anyone hear of Bar Ilan University?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that was named after a mayor Bar Ilan, a much younger son of the Netziv of Volozhin. Okay, fine. Before I do the handout tonight, let's study a little Chumash text. Okay, so you'll know what it is that he's coming to explain. I worked out the schedule. This just happens to be the parsha of the week, Shmos. Going to be reading this in shul this week. So not only do you come away with a class on great books and their authors, you may actually have some grist for the Shabbos table this week. Okay?
This is the first book of Exodus?
First passage in the book of Exodus. Okay? Take a look on page 259. Okay. I'm starting from verse 8. Okay? A new king who did not know of Joseph came into power over Egypt. He announced to his people, "The Israelites are becoming too numerous and strong for us. We must deal wisely with them. Otherwise they may increase so much that if there is a war, they shall join our enemies and fight against us, driving us from the land." Pause for a minute. Okay? This is what we call, in the modern American vernacular, dual loyalties, fifth columnists. All right? Everyone familiar with the term fifth columnist? Holian, help me out with this one. There's something from Greek mythology. You know, there were 4 columns of troops attacking Troy or something like that, and there was a fifth. Some general said there's a fifth column. There's traitors inside the city, right?
The traitors.
Right.
Yes.
But what's that from? Isn't that from
That's
Homer or something?
Not that I know.
Oh, okay. Whatever.
I'm going to check it because
Okay.
I think.
All right, it's something in world culture. There was some general who was being besieged. He was in the city, and there were 4 columns of troops coming from every direction against the city. And he said he's most fearful of the 5th column. And his captain asked, "What 5th column? There are only 4 columns." And he said, "I'm talking about the traitors inside the city." Okay, so that's become part of the modern political vernacular. When you feel that you have a mutiny brewing from within that's going to join your outside enemies, those are called 5th columnists. Okay, so the first anti-Semitic accusation of the Egyptian Pharaoh is the Jews are 5th columnists. If we'll be in a war with a foreign power, they're going to join up with them. Okay? Now, another issue that the Netziv is really going to be addressing in the passage we learned tonight. Okay? Notice how he says they're becoming too numerous and strong for us. He doesn't mention the fact that they've got some real good grievances against us. We're the taskmasters, we're the slave owners, and they're the slaves. Okay? If I was living in Mississippi in 1860, okay, and I was a plantation owner, and the Union forces were surrounding Biloxi, Mississippi at the time, I wouldn't be worried about the fact that I have too many slaves and that's why they're going to join the Union soldiers. I'd be worried that I've been whipping my slaves against a whipping post, for 20 years. That's why they're going to join, the Union soldiers. That's not what Pharaoh is saying. They're too numerous. Now they're too numerous. Okay, it's not mutually exclusive. You could say, well, Pharaoh is, if it would be 10 slaves, we have to worry about it's one thing. If it's, 2 million slaves, okay. But you see that the emphasis is on the Jewish population explosion, not on the grievances that they've rendered the Israelites, the Jews. 11. The Egyptians appointed conscription officers over the Israelites to crush their spirits with hard labor. The Israelites were to build up the cities of Pithom and Ramses as supply centers for Pharaoh. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites proliferated and spread. The Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians started to make the Israelites do labor designated to break their bodies. They made the lives of the Israelites miserable with harsh labor involving mortar and bricks, as well as all kinds of work in the field. All the work they made them do was intended to break them. Turn to page 261. The king of Egypt spoke to the chief Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah. He said, when you deliver Hebrew women, you must look carefully at the birth stool. If the infant is a boy, kill it. But if it is a girl, let it live. Okay, how the midwives reacted is not the point right now. What I want to read for you is the basic couple of psukim. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this from the Haggadah that we all read at our Passover Seders, our Pesach Seders every year. You know the basic narrative of what we had to endure as slaves in Egypt. Okay, but here you have it very clearly in a few clipped verses. Okay, Pharaoh is worried about 5th columnists of the Jews, and his reaction is backbreaking work, a ratcheting up of the slave labor, and a genocidal policy of killing all the Hebrew boys. Okay. That's biblical passage number 1 that I wanted you to see. Okay. Take a look on page 235. Okay? I'm going to be reading to you on page 235, verses 31 through 34. Okay, we're time traveling a little bit. We're going in the first descent of the Israelites into Egypt before they were a massive slave nation. To his brothers and family, Joseph said, you got it? Verse 31 on page 235? Mm-hmm. To his brothers and his family, Joseph said, I will go and tell Pharaoh. I will say the following to him. My brothers and my father's family have come to me from Canaan. These men deal in livestock and are tenders of sheep. They have brought along their sheep, their cattle, and all their possessions. Pause for a minute. Okay? Is anyone here familiar with Hinduism? A little comparative religion? Okay, Elise, share for the rest of us. In the Hindu doctrine of transmigration of souls, aka reincarnation. Okay, the lowest rung is a pariah, correct? The highest rung is a Brahmin.
Yes.
But what's even higher than a Brahmin?
The cattle.
Exactly.
The cows. Okay? The cows.
Now try to imagine if I moved into Bombay and I said, "What's your profession?" Oh, I slaughter cows for a living. I eat their meat. I make leather belts and footgear out of their hide. I make musical instruments out of their horns. I basically exploit cows for everything they're worth. Okay, how far do you think you'd get in Bombay?
Not very.
Okay, so that's exactly what's going on over here. Let's read on. When Pharaoh summons you and inquires as to your occupation, you must say, we and our fathers have dealt in livestock all our lives. You will then be able to settle in the Goshen district, since all shepherds are taboo in Egypt.
Huh?
Read the footnote of Rabbi Kaplan. Shepherds are taboo. Some say this is because sheep were sacred to the Egyptians, and hence those who raised them for food were considered an abomination. Very, very close to the way the Hindus feel about cows. That's the way in the pantheon of gods of the ancient Egyptians, that's how they felt about shepherds. Okay? But you can see very clearly that Joseph is trying to direct his brothers to settle in an exclusively Israelite Hebrew canton/ghetto called Goshen. Alright? In upstate New York, there's also a Goshen. It's named after the biblical Goshen. Okay? Okay. At any rate. Fine. So here's what we have. We have that the Pale of Jewish settlement, or actually, I'm doing a play on words. The Pale of settlement in Russia was the area that had to be Judenrein, where Jews couldn't live. It's living beyond the Pale. All right? But the beyond the Pale, I should say, that Joseph wanted for his brothers was this land called Goshen. Okay? All right, these are the two things that we have to have in mind before we examine the Netziv. Now let's take a look, and we're going to be studying a translated passage. I apologize because unfortunately this work is not available in English, and therefore it's translated probably pretty poorly by yours truly. And this is the Hamek Dover, the commentary to the Netziv of Volozhin to Shmos. Okay, please take one and pass it along. Wait a second before you start reading it.
Thank you.
Now, as I had a traditional picture of Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch last week, I have a traditional picture of the Netziv. There's actually a photograph. And no, he was not Hasidic, despite the curly coupees. And there was not an exclusively Hasidic mode of dress in the mid-19th century. Pretty much a lot of Ashkenazi Jews were that way. Okay. Now, before we start reading the passage of the Netziv, one more verse in the Chumash. Back to page 259. The preamble, the context for the new order. Okay, when I say the new order, I meant the Nazi-like policies of the Egyptian pharaoh that we read before. Now let's look at the transitional verse. Page 259, verse 7. Okay, the first 6 verses are basically talking about the names of the tribes of Israel and that they all died. Verse 7 on page 259. The Israelites were fertile and prolific, and their population increased. They became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Okay, the operative words here are the with them. Okay, the Hebrew reads, Saul, please, read for us. Okay. Vatimale haaretz otam. Okay, and now we begin the Hamek Dover. Okay, I've been doing a lot of reading tonight. Let me give somebody else a chance. Ed, start reading for us the first paragraph here.
According to the rules of grammar, the verse should have read Vatimale haaretz mehem, which equals from them. In fact, Onkelos renders the Hebrew original as if it had read mayhem. Is it right? Yet the text reads before us Vatimelai haaretz osam.
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 Ashkenazi pronunciation.
This grammatical irregularity teaches us that it was not merely the canton of Goshen, designed exclusively as for a Jewish settlement, that was full overflowing with Jews. Rather, the entire land of Egypt, despite being designated the place of Egyptian settlement, was nevertheless full of Jews as well. The implication of the word osam, together with them, is together with them. We find a precedent of this usage in Vayikra 17:15.
17:5. Okay, let's stop here for a minute. Okay, little digduk, a little Hebrew grammar. What the Netziv is pointing out is that the real way, and the way the Onkelos renders this pasuk, it should have read in Hebrew, Vatimale haaretz mehem. The land became full of them, from them. Okay, which would mean they were given this canton of Goshen. Obviously, it was wide open. The Homesteading Act that came down, 70 souls, we all know, came down to Egypt. And now they had this prolific, almost miraculous, according to our Talmudic and Midrashic sources, multiple births were the norm for Jewish women back then. And they had this really explosive population growth. Okay, so Goshen should have been teeming with Jews. Says the Netziv, if that was the meaning, it would have said Vatimale haaretz, definite article haaretz would have meant the land of Goshen, mayhem. It doesn't say that. It says Vatimale haaretz osam, which has more of a meaning of together with them, meaning that Egyptians and Jews were living cheek by jowl. Okay? They did not restrict themselves to some kind of outside the pale settlement in Goshen, as was obviously the design. Right? You're shepherd people. This is a culture that worships sheep. It's not a good idea for you to be living among them. No, they lived among them. They were integrated neighborhoods. Now, before I get to the rest of his thesis, let's see if Rabbi Kaplan's translation bears out what he says. Vayikra 17:5. Give me a second. Let me just find the pages over here. Vayikra 17:5. Page 593. No.
No, 594. 595, rather.
593. We're in Vayikra now. 593. Okay, verse 5, right at the top of the page. Okay. I'm going to read it the way the Netziv wants it translated, not the way Rabbi Kaplan translates it. It's basically just the last 2 words that I'm going to be altering. The Israelites shall thus take the sacrifice. Okay, just to give you context, this is talking about the prohibition that's not in the Talmud of Shchutei Chutz, which means we had a tabernacle, we had a temple. There were boundaries to these buildings, and within these boundaries was considered consecrated ground. Okay, in terms of ritual slaughter, slaughtering a kosher species of animal in a way that renders the meat kosher, the technique for slaughter is the same whether you're dealing with an unconsecrated animal or with a sacrifice. It's the same. However, there's a boundary. You're not supposed to take unconsecrated animals, things that you plan on consuming for private use, and slaughter them within the boundaries of the temple compound, nor are you allowed to slaughter animals that are going to be sacrificed outside the temple compound. That's the prohibition that we're about to read here. The Israelites shall thus take the sacrifices they are offering in the fields and bring them to God, to the communion tent entrance, where they are given to the priest. They can be offered as peace offerings to God. He doesn't translate, he just deletes the last word. Okay? The way the Netziv would translate that last sentence was, they can then be offered along with peace offerings. Okay? Whatever type of sacrifice they're bringing, a sin offering, a burnt offering, whatever it is, they can then be offered along with the peace offerings, if they'll be sacrificed in the proper place. The last word in Hebrew in the pasuk is otam. So, you have that pasuk or not? Okay, 592. It's a very strange usage of the word otam, no? V'zavchu zivchei shlamim la'Hashem otam. What does that mean, otam?
Unless you go with them.
Right. He's saying it means what we would say itam. Right? It's an irregular usage, but it's still, the text tolerates that translation. Okay, so that's his precedent. Okay? Fine. So thesis number one of the Hamek Dovid. The Jews did not restrict themselves to the land of Goshen. Okay. Well, let's read the next paragraph. Elise, the Jews purchased. Read the second paragraph of this handout here.
Oh, sure. The Jews purchased and settled in an empty tract.
Any empty tract.
In any empty tract that they could find. Now, we can understand what the Torah writes in Shemos 12, verse 11, 13, 25, and 27, regarding the plague of the slaying of the firstborn. And Hashem will hop over the opening.
Stop. I use the word hop. Can you think of a synonym for hop that's perhaps a little bit more familiar?
Pass.
Jump.
Pass over. All right? Okay, stop. Before you read on, let's take a look at those verses. We've got an open chumash. Let's see exactly what he's talking about. Shemos 12:11. Okay, let's start page 311. On page 311, the second verse. It starts with verse 10. We're going to start with verse 11. Okay, this is the commandment for the generation that's about to make the exodus from Egypt. This is the mitzvah, the technique, the proper way to offer the sacrifice that we call the Passover sacrifice. You must eat it with your waist belted, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand. You must eat it in haste. It is the Passover offering to God. Odd name. How did it get that name? We call the holiday by the name of the sacrifice. But how did the sacrifice get that name? And the answer, as we will soon see, is the sacrifice is named after the miracle. Let's move on. 13. The blood will be a sign on your house where you are staying. I will see the blood and pass you by Pasach. There will not be any deadly plague among you when I strike Egypt. 25. Skip down to 25 on the next page. When you come to the land that God will give you, as He promised, you must also keep this service. Your children may then ask you, what is this service to you? Okay, it's beginning to sound familiar. It is part of the Haggadah, the night of Pesach. You must answer, it is the Passover service to God. He passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when He struck the Egyptians, sparing our homes. Finally, verse 27.
You did it.
Oh, I did it? Mm-hmm. Okay, fine. 25, 26, 27. I read it. Okay. In other words, the Netziv is saying, if you don't posit integrated neighborhoods, if you're going to say that the Jews stuck to the ghettoization policy first instituted by Joseph, and actually, we're going to, if time allows, I'll show you where that Yaakov, even before Yosef, wanted his children to be living separately from the Egyptians. If they had stuck to that policy, all of these verses are nonsense. If all the Jews are concentrated in one region of Egypt, and the plague is going on in monolithic, apartheid South Africa, right? There's Johannesburg, and then there's Soweto, right? And no blacks are living in J-Town itself, in apartheid South Africa, right? If ancient Egypt was apartheid Egypt, okay? If all the Egyptians are living in the rest of the country, and all the Jews are living exclusively and only in Goshen, there's no Passover going on. To have a Passover, there's got to be integrated neighborhoods. Otherwise, there's no such miracle. We're saying the angel of death is hopscotching. He's going from one Egyptian home to another Egyptian home, and he's passing over, he's hopping over, skipping, whatever word you want to use, the Jewish home or homes in the middle. Okay, read on, Elise.
In other words, there must have been many Jewish homes mixed in amidst the Egyptian homes. Even though the Pharaoh of Egypt pursued a policy of foreign ghettoization, forced ghettoization in order to squeeze the Jews and depress them, as we'll explain later.
Hamek Dover, HD stands for Hamek Dover.
Hamek Dover to Shemos 2, chapter 2, verse 25, and chapter 3, verse 7. Still, this policy was capricious and pursued in a way that many Jews remained behind, integrated into Egyptian neighborhoods.
Period. Okay. So first of all, again, we're running out of time, so I'm not going to read you, and I didn't translate it, I'm not going to read you inside another passage of Hamek Dover, but suffice it to say that the man was prescient. Again, he died in 1893. He died, almost 40, 50 years before the Nazis. But a lot of he was describing of ancient Egypt could have been applied to the Third Reich as well. Okay, as most of you probably know, a prelude to the concentration camps and the death camps were the ghettoization of Jews from the countryside into major urban areas of already large Jewish population throughout Egypt. There was a Vilna ghetto, and a Kovna ghetto, and a Warsaw ghetto, and a Lodz ghetto, and a Budapest ghetto, right? Anywhere where there was a big Jewish city, they would take Jews from all over the countryside and force them in. Okay, so the Hamek Dover says, it wasn't again just a point of enforced separateness. Part of the idea was, as the backbreaking work, and parenthetically, a lot of the backbreaking work our Midrash and Talmud reveals to us were exercises in futility. They weren't just meant to break the back, they were meant to break the spirit. The Jews should feel like they're not even accomplishing anything significant. Part of this ghettoization, says the Hamek Dover, and again he proves it from the text itself, right, was to cram too many people into too small a space. And that was meant as psychological warfare. That was meant to take away people's privacy. That was meant to destroy relationships, to reduce intimacy, and just to have a general sense of, I'm squeezed here. I have no room. I have no elbow room. I have no room to operate.
To breathe the spirit.
Right, exactly. Okay? So, nevertheless, it wasn't a hermetically sealed ghetto, as was usually the case in the Nazi ghettos. Okay? Here, you had a lot of ghettoization going on, some self-imposed by the policy set in force by Yaakov and Yosef, some by the Egyptian Pharaoh. Nevertheless, somehow or another, we see there must have been integration. Otherwise, there's no Passover miracle. Okay, Helene, the Torah states, the next paragraph, please.
The Torah states this is to inform us of the context and the underlying reason for the anti-Semitism of the Egyptian populace and the anti-Jewish legislation of the Egyptian government. See verses 8 through 22.
Okay, we don't have to see those. That's how I opened the class with. That's the first passage that we read. In other words, the idea, the suspicion that the Jews are fifth columnists, okay, and the way we battle it is by giving them backbreaking work and by killing the male children. Go ahead.
Both were predicated on a paranoid suspicion of a conspiracy the Jews were completely innocent of, as will be explained.
Keep on reading, the next paragraph too.
This resulted from their attempts to counter the will and desire of their patriarch Yaakov, that they dwell exclusively in the land of Goshen, so that they be isolated and separated from the Egyptians, as I have written in Parshas Vayegash. They, however, did not want to do so. The Midrash in Shemos Rabbah,
it's pronounced.
thank you,
Okay.
Shemos Rabbah, writes further that it was an assimilationist spirit that underpinned their decision to suspend the practice of circumcision. They said, quote, "Let us be like the Egyptians," end of quote. Having integrated into their neighborhoods, they saw fit to blend in physically as well by remaining uncircumcised, so as not to be recognized as Jews.
Okay. So even though I wrote before, and that was really my embellishment, the Hebrew doesn't contain the word capricious, I said that there was a capriciousness to the Pharaoh's policy of ghettoization. Okay, there was a little bit of a method to the madness. Basically, the Jews who were ghettoized, for the most part, for the vast majority, were those that preferred to be ghettoized. There were Jewish separatists, there were Jewish isolationists, there were Jews who had no problem with the idea of being something apart and strange and alien to the dominant Egyptian culture. Okay? The Jews who integrated into the Egyptian neighborhoods, now exactly when this, historically on the timeline, this is before the hard slavery started, but after, it seems to me that it was before any really serious backbreaking slavery started. These are what we would call today social climbers. These were the kind of Jews who figured the way to get ahead is if you can't beat them, join them. Okay? We're never going to get out of here. We came down here as a small family. It's not like we ever had a land that we could call our own. Yeah, God promised us some land. I don't know. Should I believe these prophets? Should I not believe this mythical, oral tradition that we have handed down to us? In the meantime, we're in Egypt, and when an Egyptian, act like the Egyptians, right? When in Rome, act like the Romans, right? Be as the Romans, as the expression goes. That was the basic mindset of those Jews who choose to move out of the ghetto, to move out of the Goshen, and integrate into Jewish neighborhoods. So listen to what the Netziv is saying. Okay? And this is something that, all I can call it is, it's a Das Torah. You can take it or you can leave it. Okay? There's a Torah giant talking. Most sociologists would tell you the exact opposite. Okay? Certainly if you listen to Republican pundits today, a lot of whom are running on strong anti-immigration planks, they say, no more ESL programs. America's a great melting pot. We had waves of immigrations, for hundreds of years before this. We don't need all these hyphenated Americans. We don't need, Caribbean Day Parade. And we don't need ESL programs. We don't need Hispanic Americans. There are no Irish Americans. The Irish became Americans. The Italian became Americans. The Jews became Americans. They were thrust into the public school system, and they learned English sink or swim, right? That's how people talk today. In other words, the cure for anti-immigrant bias and hatred and prejudice is, let's all assimilate. Let it be all one big melting pot. Right? That's what a sociologist will tell you. That may be what a sociologist tells you, but that's not what the Netziv told you. Right? It wasn't merely a quantitative problem here. The paranoia of the Pharaoh when he said, they're fifth columnists. They're going to join up with our enemies. Remember I said before, why did he say they're going to join up with our enemies? Because of all the rotten things we did to them. Well, the real rotten policies have not begun yet. We've inverted the cause and effect. So then why did they think that they were going to be fifth columnists? They're moving into our neighborhoods. They're applying for admission to our universities. They're trying to get into our craft guilds. They're trying to be us. Nothing doing. They're displacing us. That gets them nervous. It's not the separatist Jews that Pharaoh was afraid of. It was the assimilationist Jews that started the whole paranoia. And this is why I titled the class on the roots of anti-Semitism. If time allows, I'm going to read you another passage from the Netziv where he says it even more explicitly. The Medrash says, this is not the Netziv talking, this is already the sages of the Talmud said, that there were Jews who suspended the practice of circumcision. Why? Because the Egyptians were not circumcised. From one way or the other, if you remember the biblical narrative, the story of Shimon and Levi and the city of Shem and the rape of Dinah, right? So it's one way or another. You want to be one nation with us? You want intermarriage? So all you guys should become circumcised. Otherwise, forget it. We're not interested in intermarrying, in blending our two families. Right? So if you can't beat them, join them. If they're not all going to be circumcised, which obviously was going to happen, so we'll remain uncircumcised. That's how far it went.
Do they look physically similar?
What? Ethnically?
No, the Egyptians and the Hebrews at the time.
My understanding is that they did not.
They didn't look.
No. My understanding is they did not. However, I will tell you this. Okay, again, let's just to update it, to give it some kind of framework that we can understand. Okay? If you're working, in a top flight Wall Street legal firm, bunch of tax attorneys in the city, right? And you've got an African American Harvard graduate. Okay? How do you deal with your colleague? How do you feel around your colleague on a professional level if they show up the first day and say, "My name is John McCormick," or Joan McCormick, and they're wearing a nice, well-tailored Barney's business suit, right, with wingtip Oxfords and a nice tie on the one hand, or if they walk in with numerous body piercings, some colorful turban, and some African tribal dress, and and they introduce themselves as Kwanzaa Tanisha or something like that, right? Okay, I'm trying to make it un-Jewish so that you won't get your defense mechanisms up, right? I'm not saying it wasn't a society that didn't yield to Dr. King's dream where they judge people by the content of the character, not by the color of their skin. But there are other things that we can do to show we want to assimilate. We want to be like you. Okay? Despite ethnic differences. Okay. Helene, bring it in for a landing. Just the small paragraphs. Just read to the bottom of the page.
The Midrash goes on to explain that this is why, quote, Hashem turned their, parens, the Egyptians, close parens, hearts to hate his nation.
Stop for a moment. Oh, okay. That's another biblical reference. That's, oh my.
His nation, I'm assuming, means that the Israelites?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, this is a passage from Tehillim, from the Psalms, Psalm 105, verse 29. Let me give you a free translation of that. And I'll read it to you with a few preceding verses so you'll understand the context. 105. All right, what did I say? 105 to 29.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, joy. This one doesn't have the numbers on the verses. Oh my. Okay, here it is. Okay, I'm reading from approximately verse 26 to 27 in Psalm 105. And Israel came into Egypt, and Jacob dwelt in the land of Ham. Actually, that word dwelt means he was an alien in the land of Ham. And they abrogated his covenant very much, and they became mighty from their oppressors. Like we read in the biblical narrative, that the more they were oppressed, the more the population grew. Right? He turned around their hearts to hate his nation and to plot against his servants. Okay? So again, this is not the Netziv talking. This is the Medrash talking. The Medrash says that one was a result of the other. You see, the previous verse says they abrogated his covenant, Vayefer. That's Mefer Bris. In other words, they stopped keeping circumcision. It's cause and effect. That's why God turned the hearts of the Egyptians to hate his nation. They had an assimilationist streak. Anti-Semitism was the result. Read on.
I've already commented in Bereshit chapter 15, verse 13, that this is the reason that, open quote, in each and every generation they rise up to annihilate us, close quote.
Okay, so do you recognize that quote as well? That's also something from the Passover Haggadah. B'chol dar v'dar, I'm the malayim l'chal eseinu. The Hishiyamda, right? It's one of the popular songs, the night of the Seder. He sheyamda v'hi sheyamda la v'seinu v'lana. Shelo yechad bilvad amar aleinu l'chalos and elo shebechol doir v'dar omdim aleinu l'chalos einu v'yakadosh baruch hu matzileinu miyadam. Right? God says from the hands. Yes?
So do the Hasidim have it correct then?
The what?
Because they don't want to, we should make ourselves separate and we're unwilling to make ourselves alien. So
We'll get to that in a few minutes. First,
to the,
first let's finish reading the passage. Let's finish this thing. Okay. Go ahead.
Because we are unwilling to be alien among and separate from the nations. And then the footnote?
Yes.
Okay. 1. Not only to restrict Jews to living in certain areas, but to constrict them by forcing too large a population into the ghetto.
Okay, I spoke about that at length when I first started the verse, so I don't really need the footnote. Okay, I just want to, before I expand a little bit more on what the Netziv says, I want you to look at one more pasuk together with me, and I want to tell you an argument between Nachmanides and Maimonides about this pasuk. This is in Dvarim 10:19. Let me find it for you. Dvarim 10:19. Page 919. Okay. (10:19). You must also show love towards the foreigners, since you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. You have it? Page 919, verse 19? Mm-hmm. I'm not stuttering. It's 919, pause.
Yes.
19. Okay? Verse 19. 19. You must also show love towards the foreigner, since you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. Anyone ever hear of this mitzvah before? Yeah. Mm-hmm. The Hebrew is V'ahavtam es hager. Okay, the Visions of Chassidim like to say, how do we know the Visions of Chassidus was foretold in the Bible? Because it says V'ahavtam es hager. Hagar is the family name of the Visions of Rebbes. Mm-hmm. So you should love the Hagars. Okay? V'ahavtam es hager. Fine. It says before this that God is a lover of the orphan, the widow, and the ger. What does the word ger mean? So, it says here, foreigner. But, you know that it means?
Convert.
Bingo. Take a look at Rabbi Kaplan's footnote underneath the Hebrew side of the page. See where it says 10:19? Show love. This is a special commandment to show love towards a proselyte. Unless King James English, a proselyte is what we would call a convert to Judaism. So which is it? A foreigner or a convert? So here there's a famous philosophical argument between Nachmanides and Maimonides. Who says what? Escapes me at the moment. My memory is like a sieve right now. But I know that they're the two opposing opinions. I think, I'm going to say it over the way I think I remember. Maimonides learns it the way all of us with good Jewish hearts like to learn it, which is to say, empathy. You've been there before. We've all seen the pictures of the Rabbi Dr. Abraham Joshua Heschel marching arm in arm with Dr. Martin Luther King in Selma and Montgomery, right? Jews, having been slaves in Egypt, can identify with African American slave experience. You were there. Break the historical pattern of abuse. Don't, because you were an abused child, grow up to be an abusive parent. You were a slave. You know what it is to be a stranger in a foreign land. Have a little empathy for the people feeling strange. And that certainly would seem contextually to go along very well with God being described as a deity who loves the orphan and loves the widow. It means you've got to fight for the weakest members of society, and you should do so with a little empathy, especially in the case of the ger, of the foreigner. You know what it means to be a foreigner. Okay? Don't forget your roots, don't forget where you came from. A little empathy, especially with your shared histories. That's Maimonides, if memory serves. Nachmanides says the mitzvah would not then be to love. That would be to pity. If the mitzvah is love, love is predicated on respect. You see something superlative. You don't see a weakness in the ger. you see something that's superlative, that's maybe greater than what you possess in the ger. And what that is as follows. A convert to Judaism is burning their bridges. They leave their former faith community. Very often they leave their family behind. They leave their country of origin behind. Okay, think Ruth, the Moabite princess. Think of that. Right? That as a paradigm, as a model for conversion to Judaism. And despite this mitzvah, okay, unfortunately, sadly, in the crucible of reality, they're not always going to be welcomed with open arms into the Jewish community. Human nature being what human nature is. Right? In other words, they knowingly choose a life of strangeness, of I'm going to be ill at ease. Right? I'm going to be a little bit neither here nor there. But because these are my convictions, because I've recognized the truth of the Torah, I'm willing to do it. For my Yiddishkeit, for my Judaism, I'm willing to be a stranger. So there's no dissonance between the translation convert and the word stranger. He says that's what the bulk of you people were in Egypt. Most of the Jews in Egypt were anti-assimilationists. There's a famous medrash that it's remarkable to me that the Netziv in neither place, neither here nor in Bereshis, which I didn't translate for you. In neither place does he talk about the famous medrash that says, "Lo nigalu avosenu mitzrayim el b'shul shalashinu es malbusham es shmam ves lashonam." Our forefathers were not redeemed from Egypt except for the fact that they never changed their names, their language, nor their mode of clothing. Okay? Well, they had a strong separatist identity, for the most part. Okay? That's how Nachmanides learns this pasuk. Love the ger because you were willing to remain a second-class citizen. You willfully, the ghettoization did not start as an anti-Semitic policy on the part of the Pharaoh. You chose ghettoization. You don't care if we read it in the Kaplan Chumash, the Living Torah. We don't care if you're taboo in Egyptian society. You know, a fly on Egyptian society. I don't need Egyptian society. I've got my God. I've got my people. I don't need any more gratification than that. I don't need to be a social climber. I don't need to get ahead in, parenthetically, the mightiest and most advanced civilization of the ancient world. That allure doesn't seduce me at all. I'm willing to remain a second-class citizen in my little ghetto, but I'm true to my God, I'm true to my people, I'm true to my convictions. I'm okay with that. But not everyone, so to speak, is equal to that challenge. And like I said, perhaps sociologists wouldn't agree with the Netziv's presentation, or really the roots of the Netziv are in Nachmanides and are in, even earlier than that, the Medrash. Why did God, as per the Tehillim, which is really just a reiteration of the verses that we read, population explosion, the Egyptians start to hate us. The population starts to hate us, the Pharaoh institutes policy against us. The verse in Tehillim says, they abrogated his covenant. Hafach libam lisnayama. He changed their hearts to hate his nation. All right? Those are the roots of anti-Semitism as per the Netziv. It's not the separatist Jews, the odd-looking ones, the ones who don't master the language, that arouse the anti-Semitic hatred and the anti-Semitic policies. It's dafka, the assimilationist Jews, that for some bizarre reason causes the dominant population to start getting insecure, to start feeling paranoid, and to start thinking of them as fifth columnists. I've heard it said, I forget from which God, this isn't from the Netziv, that, we usher in Shabbos by making Kiddush. And we say goodbye to Shabbos by making Havdalah. The word Kiddush means sanctification. The word Havdalah means separation. I forgot which Torah giant said this, but he quipped once, and basically encapsulating the whole thesis of the Netziv into a few short words. He said, when Jews make Kiddush, God leaves them alone and the population leaves them alone. When they sanctify themselves, sanctification is already a means of separation. If you're hewing to a higher moral and ethical standard, if you're keeping the ritual parts of Judaism, if you lead a sanctified life, that's fine. But if you don't, God makes sure the anti-Semite does Havdalah for you. They'll find a way to separate you. If you're not willing to separate yourselves, they'll find a way to separate you. I don't want to end on a pessimistic note. I want to say something that's inspired But I remember I started saying that he was not only an author of books, but an author of people, and one of the illustrious students of the yeshiva under his stewardship was Rav Kook, the first Ashkenazic chief rabbi of Israel. And I'm not a great disciple, I'm not that conversant in the works of Rav Kook, but I think the insight that I'm about to say is Cookian. Okay? Now listen to me for a minute. Isn't it striking, though? I seem to be bashing assimilationist Jews over here, not me, the Netziv, right? But what's his major argument? That there had to have been assimilationist. He's got a little grammatical irregularity, which, again, I bow my head to his, profound and encyclopedic knowledge of biblical Hebrew grammar. But the main point is, not the grammatical irregularity, but he's got a very good question. Where did Passover come from if they were all living in a ghetto, right? That's his real argument. It had to have been integration, or there never would have been the miracle of Passover.
Because otherwise,
to which, what?
Otherwise, why would they have to put the lamb's blood on there?
Exactly.
Angel death wouldn't pass over.
Why did the sacrifice get his name? Why did they have to do the lamb's blood? Why is the miracle described as the angel of death hopping from one to the other? Right? Okay. Excellent question. I end with that same rhetorical question. Okay. So why did divine providence allow things to develop in such a way that this very negative development of assimilationist tendencies among the Jews and this violent, genocidal, anti-Semitic, because make no mistake, what do I care if you're sending people to gas chambers in Auschwitz, or if you're taking every male Jewish man-child and throwing and drowning it in a river? You're destroying the Jewish people, physically annihilating them. Either way. I don't know the answer to that question, but I have an observation to make. For some reason, shrouded in the mysteries of predestination versus free will, this is how divine providence allowed history to unfold. And the holiday as we know it never would have been known by its name if not for those assimilationist Jews. If not for the fact that Jews had moved out of the ghetto, we would not have a Passover.
Thank God for assimilation.
Exactly. Exactly. One second. Let me finish. I don't mean to be flip. Thank God for assimilation. Because no matzo balls, right? No iron luxury, none of the noodles. No, let me finish. I'll take all the jokes on. I want to bring this in for a landing. The Navi says, the prophet says, Ki meitzeis chameretz Mitzrayim and neflois. As in the days of Egypt, as your exodus from Egypt, I will show you wonders. Okay, that's a prediction of the Messianic era. Right? That's what it says in the prophet. The sages of the Talmud and Medrash say that the exodus from Egypt is a paradigm. It sets in motion the historical model for the Messianic redemption as well. The Messianic redemption is going to be like the exodus from Egypt, but writ large, even bigger, but the same kind of patterns. So while we bemoan what has gone on in world Jewry over the last 200 years, the ignorance, the assimilation, the intermarriage, the hemorrhaging of our people through intermarriage, I gotta believe, because I have faith in a benevolent and good and fair and loving providence, that somehow or another, when the Messianic redemption comes, the big name, the name of that event, will again be named Dafka after those assimilationist Jews. That's not the Netziv, don't blame him. I'm taking blame or credit for this word. It's a cookie and kind of insight. I mean, thank God for assimilation. Yes, go ahead. I'm done for the evening.